Я являюсь проектным менеджером второй фазы DARYA SCAFFOLD. От имени всей нашей команды рада поприветствовать вас на первом вебинаре по профессиональному развитию педагогов в рамках программы вебинаров DARYA SCAFFOLD. Очень приятно видеть, что с нами сегодня коллеги из разных стран Центральной Азии. Прежде чем мы начнем, давайте мы убедимся, что все работает. Скажите, пожалуйста, либо напишите в чате, хорошо ли меня слышно и видно.
Да, добрый день, вас слышно, видно.
Хорошо, прекрасно, спасибо большое. Также, уважаемые педагоги, основная часть вебинара будет вестись на английском языке. С нами сегодня работает переводчик-синхронист Мария, которая будет помогать вам с переводом на русский язык. Поэтому, пожалуйста, когда начнется основная часть вебинара, в нижней части вашего экрана найдите кнопку глобуса, нажмите на него, и вы будете слушать содержание на русском языке. В следующий момент, пожалуйста, выключите, пожалуйста, все микрофоны для того, чтобы сегодняшняя сессия прошла максимально эффективно. И последний технический момент. Вебинар сегодня записывается. Мы делаем запись доступной для тех, кто не смог присоединиться сегодня. Поэтому, если вы не хотите, чтобы ваше видео попадало в запись, просто выключите камеру. Пока мы ждем, чтобы все подключились, пожалуйста, напишите в чате, из какой вы страны и какое учебное заведение вы представляете, потому что это всегда приятно видеть, какая у нас широкая география. Да, теперь также, уважаемые коллеги, хотелось бы в первую очередь несколько слов рассказать о том, что такое DARYA SCAFFOLD. DARYA SCAFFOLD – это часть большой, широкой инициативы Европейского Союза под названием DARYA – диалог и действие для находчивой молодежи Центральной Азии, которая реализует Европейский фонд образования. DARYA направлена на развитие образования и навыков в Казахстане, Кыргызстане, Таджикистане, Туркменистане и Узбекистане и вносит вклад в стратегию Евросоюза Global Gateway. В рамках этой инициативы DARYA SCAFFOLD фокусируется на поддержке педагогов и совершенствовании качества профессионального образования и обучения. Мы помогаем педагогам внедрять компетентностный подход и проектировать учебную деятельность посредством инструмента SCAFFOLD. У нас есть два открытых пространства для общения в рамках DARYA SCAFFOLD, которые я хотела бы сейчас представить. Первое – это телеграм-сообщество DARYA SCAFFOLD, где уже более 900 педагогов из всех 5 стран. Там вы можете поделиться идеями, задать вопросы и узнать информацию о самых ближайших мероприятиях. Второе – это мини-сайт DARYA SCAFFOLD, где собраны практические ресурсы, примеры успешных практик из региона и календарь всех будущих мероприятий. Ссылка на эти платформы сейчас размещена в чате, поэтому мы всех приглашаем вас присоединиться и быть частью активного регионального сообщества. Мы запланировали для вас 6 вебинаров, посвященных профессиональному развитию педагогов, и сегодняшний вебинар является открывающим. Серия вебинаров состоится как последовательный процесс, охватывающий весь цикл педагогической деятельности от анализа образовательной среды и планирования обучения с использованием методов SCAFFOLD до оценки результатов, изучения воздействия и распространения эффективных практик. Поэтому, пожалуйста, постарайтесь быть с нами на протяжении всей серии. Все основные даты проведения вебинаров будут также опубликованы на всех наших страницах. И чтобы сразу перейти к делу, я с радостью передаю слово эксперту DARYA SCAFFOLD, доктору Расселу Григу, директору программы педагогической подготовки в университете Свонси в Великобритании. Доктор Григ проведет сегодняшний вебинар и поделится с вами своими идеями и опытом. Russell, the floor is yours. Напоминаю, уважаемые участники, для смены языка, пожалуйста, нажмите значок глобуса и выберите русский язык.
Okay, thank you, Victoria, and Privet. Welcome, everybody. to this seminar series. So the first thing we need to talk a little about is the aims. Victoria, who will be operating the presentation?
I'm operating it, Russell.
Oh, good. Okay. So thank you. So if we could move on then, please, to talk about the aims. The next slide, please. So our series is about professional development in using the scaffold cards. And we're going to talk now about the aims of the series. So the aims of the series that we need to talk to you about are that we're going to focus in on how, as trainers, you can develop strategies with your educators and your students in the use of scaffold. Can I just say a little bit about myself and my fellow presenter? So could we go please to slide 5, to show myself and Hazel. Thank you. So myself, I am Russell Grigg. I work in Swansea University in Wales. And my colleague, who is also with us, Hazel, she's also from Wales. It's a very wet Wales at the moment. It's raining very heavily. So I hope it's not the same with you, but you're very welcome today. And my job is I train teachers, and I work with Hazel with Bantony, and we're both looking to support you in the work of professional development. If we go to the next slide, please. The next slide shows you the 6 seminars in the series. So today, in this webinar, we are talking about contextualizing teaching and learning. In other words, putting teaching and learning in context. The next webinars, number 2, will be about planning, and number 3 about teaching, number 4 about research, number 5 about evaluating, and finally sharing our work. So the next slide shows you the dates of these webinars. So you can see today, the 5th of November, we are starting to talk about contextualizing CPD, and then we'll run all the way through until April, the 6th webinar, and then finally there's the opportunity to attend a spring camp. So those are the 6 dates for these webinars. If you go to the next slide, please. This table shows you what our objectives are for each of the webinars. So today, in the first row of the table, we will be talking about context. And then next time, we'll be talking about planning and using questions. Number 3, we will be talking about project-based approaches using scaffold. The 4th webinar will be about researching using scaffold. The 5th webinar will be about evaluating the impact. So how do we know what we're doing is working? And the final webinar will be about sharing our findings. So those are the 6 webinars in the series. So if we go to the next slide, please, we will now talk to you about this webinar. And this webinar is about context. It's about understanding the context of our learners, of our teaching, of our environment. And the purpose of this webinar, if we go to the next slide, the purpose is to help you understand what effective continuing professional development looks like. It's an introductory webinar. We're going to talk today about why it is important, professional development, what kind of things you can do with your colleagues, and how we can use Scaffold to help you with your learners. So in the next slide, these are the objectives for today. The first objective is to talk about the idea of empowerment. What does empowering teachers mean? The second objective is to talk about why professional development is so important. Then we will describe the features of good professional development, so we can consider what is good professional development. And finally, we will talk about the possible activities that you can try using Scaffold. If we move to the next slide, please, let's talk now about the idea of empowerment. Empowerment is a word which suggests that we are trying to help our educators take ownership and to innovate and to lead in their teaching and help learners develop. So empowerment is trying to make a difference in how we teach and educate. If we give an example, if you think about in your country, tourism might be a very important priority. And so empowering educators is helping them understand how we can develop skills to attract more tourists and the activities we use. The slide you have before you is showing you what empowerment means for us working in different contexts. For example, the first ladder shows we are all at different starting points. Some of us are new to education. Some of us have many years' experience. So we're all at different starting points when it comes to our own professional development. We need to understand that as we develop, we take one step at a time. It happens gradually. Professional development is not overnight. It takes time. And Scaffold is a very good resource to help us with that. When we talk about professional development, it is very important to acknowledge that the people we work with progress at different rates. We must try to have empathy for colleagues who are working in different contexts. Some colleagues may not have access to digital technologies. Some colleagues may work in a small group as opposed to a large team. So we all work in different contexts. This means we need to be flexible in what we expect of colleagues. Can we go to the next slide, please? So empowerment is not about challenging authority. It is about building skills across our teams, and our education system. It is not about challenging the authority, but how we can work together to make a difference. Could you go to the next slide, please? What we're going to talk about now is why professional development is so important. We've said so far that it is about making a difference. So why is this so important? What we know from the literature is that effective professional development helps teachers to go beyond content delivery. What I mean by that is effective professional development helps teachers think about why and the how of learning, as well as the what of learning. So we want our learners to be curious, to be creative, to ask questions. We want them to work with others. So professional development is important because we need to be up to date with our knowledge to help our learners progress. Professional development also matters because it has and can make a difference to our students. In the next slide, you can see on the screen, there are 5 main features of effective professional development. You might think about where you are working as you read this and ask yourself, how effective is this where I work? So, for example, the first thing is effective professional development is about collaboration. It is about working with others within our setting and also outside our setting. This isn't always easy. People have different dispositions, different values, different personalities. However, if we're going to make a difference beyond our own classroom, we need to work well with other colleagues. So we need the skills of collaborating, and effective professional development should help us develop those skills. The second important point about effective professional development is that it should be contextual. This means that it should be tailored to our needs. Although in a few minutes I will show you examples from around the world, the most important professional development is what is happening in your location. The most important professional development has to meet your needs. If we can just have a look at this example. This is an example that you may know about. This example is from Kazakhstan, and this example shows educators working together to solve a problem. The problem isn't confined to Kazakhstan, the problem being that 1 in 5 children, 21% at least, are overweight. Obesity in our country, in Wales, is even higher. So it's a global problem. So that's the challenge. So what have educators done? In this example, educators in different schools have come together, they've collaborated, and they've worked together on what's called a green project. And in the environmental project, they're trying to help children and teachers see the importance of eating healthily. And they do so by maintaining greenhouses and growing their own vegetables. So the impact will be and is becoming that children are gaining first-hand experience and they're developing healthier habits. So this is an example. If we go back to the previous slide, please. If you go, you can see that's an example of collaboration. It's also an example of contextual. It refers to the local need. It is practical, so they're doing something practical. It is ongoing, because professional development is not a one-off event. The most important professional development is ongoing. Obesity will be with us for a very long time, so we need to develop skills to address that particular challenge. Impactful, good professional development has to make a difference. So in the example we just saw, it is making a difference to not just children, but teachers themselves. Thank you. If we go to the next slide, on again. So we need to go to, and again, please. Thank you, to the next slide. Let's have a look at some examples, not just in Kazakhstan, but in other countries. So we'll go to the next slide. Thank you. These are examples from different countries of professional development. You may have heard of some of these countries and what is happening in these countries. Let's take one at a time. In Japan, there is something called lesson study, which has become a global approach to professional development. It started in Japan in 1872, so it's a very old, well-established approach to professional development. If you don't know about lesson study, let me briefly explain what it's about. Lesson study occurs when educators come together to plan a lesson. They could be working in a college, in a school, it doesn't matter. They come together to plan a lesson around a common goal. It could be, for example, they want to try and help their students develop questioning skills. It could be they want to improve their investigation in science. So the first step is the educators meet, come together and agree on a shared goal. And then they work together and observe each other teach. And then they give each other feedback and they return to their plan and they try and improve the plan. They keep a focus on the one chosen objective. They try to make it real world, so they apply their focus to what is happening around them. Last year, the lesson study came to Kazakhstan, and there was a meeting of the World Association of Lesson Study. And if you Google this, if you go online as I speak and put in the World Association of Lesson Study, you can see the organization and you can join if you wish, or you could find out more about them. So this approach is working in many countries around the world. The next example is from Finland. Finland has a very good reputation for using research with their teachers. In Finland, teachers carry out lots of very small inquiries. One of the webinars later in this series will talk to you about how you could also carry out a small-scale inquiry. If you were to look at Finland, you will see that they do a lot of what is called action research. That means that educators use their classrooms to carry out small-scale research projects. For example, the Finnish teachers might decide to look at assessment strategies, what we call assessment for learning. And in some cases, they have tried out different strategies to help children and young people improve their own understanding of assessment. They are encouraging their students to self-assess and to reflect on their progress. This is an example of a research project they're exploring. In the third example on the screen, we can look at Canada. And in Canada, they take another approach called professional learning communities. The Canadian approach, and it is also seen in other countries, is for networks of educators to come together to share practice, not just in their school or in their college, but in their region. So they, again, have a focus. The focus is always on either teaching or learning. They focus on what they can do to improve teaching or learning. For example, they might focus on how to explain concepts clearly to children. They might focus on the use of objectives in lessons. They might focus on subject knowledge, how to make use of artificial intelligence in lessons. So they have lots of different subjects that they can explore as a community. Eventually, in a professional learning community, they showcase their learning at an event. That event might be a conference, or it might be some other form, such as a website. A fourth example of effective professional development you can find in Singapore. In Singapore, they do a lot of work developing online courses. And in Singapore, these courses are called micro-credential courses. These are aimed at adults learners who are in work and who might, for example, find it difficult to attend education full-time. So lots of these courses are available online. They build up credits. So, for instance, teachers and others can enroll on a course, and when they complete the course, they get credits, and the credits build up to a certificate or to a degree. That is a different kind of professional learning. So, for example, one course is to do with food safety. So for those who want to become chefs and want to work in the food industry, one of the courses is about food safety. Another one is about customer relations. So these are micro-credential courses which are offered in Singapore. So those are 4 examples from different countries, but there are many, many other examples of effective professional development. On the next slide, you can see more examples. I know it's a very busy slide, so I'm not going to read all that out to you because it's not good practice. But what I will say to you is if you want to know more about any of those boxes, send us an email and we can send you more information. So, for example, the first box you can see we've mentioned lesson study. But as you go around those boxes, you can see reflective diaries is another form, or reflective journals is another form of professional development. And that happens when educators keep a diary, a field note of what is happening in their classroom, and they share their field notes with their colleagues. And then they record examples of students' work. Either they record them in audio or visual or filming, and then they use those student work to discuss with colleagues the impact of their teaching. So there are lots of different ways of professional development. What we now need to talk to you about is how we can use some of these ideas in regard to Scaffold and your professional development. Could we please go to the next slide? Thank you. In this example, then, we're going to talk about Scaffold, and we're going to talk about how you might start some professional development using Scaffold. I hope most of you are aware of Scaffold. If you're not aware of it, then let us know and we can give you some web links, or we can share them in the chat, and you can access all of the Scaffold cards and the background to them. We can put that link available for you in this session or afterwards. For those of you who know about Scaffold, you will know that it is a set of cards which have been developed to support learning in different areas. And in the slide that you see, we're going to talk about setting cards. So there are various groups of cards. The group we're going to talk about are cards to do with settings. So there are 8 setting cards, and these 8 setting cards are very important to help us understand context. So what I mean by that is, although it's a bit small, I wonder whether the slide could be enlarged a little bit for colleagues to see it, but there are 8 setting cards, and if you look at them carefully, thank you very much, you will see that each of these setting cards cover different topics. So one of those topics, the first one, is the objective. So when you plan your professional development, the first thing you need to think about is, what are you trying to achieve? So what's your objective for the professional development? And when you're planning activities, what are your objectives? Is your objective, for example, to develop teamwork? Is your objective to develop questioning skills? Is your objective to develop real-world applications? So you need to be very clear about your objective for your professional development. The sharper the objective, the better. In other words, the clearer, the more measurable the objectives are, the easier it is for you to see whether you've met those objectives. For example, if I was to set an objective such as, by the end of this webinar, I would like you to have an understanding of 3 different ways of professional development, or you could list 3 different forms of professional development, that is a measurable objective. Because by the end of this seminar, I hope in the chat, you will be able to say, well, I've learned about 3 different forms of professional development. That is a sharp objective. I could measure that. I could look in the chat and I could see of the 66 people in the room, 40 could actually say you could go to Japan to learn about lesson study. You could go to Finland to learn about research. That is a very clear objective. List, identify. When you write objectives, use clear terms, use command terms, list, identify, describe, reflect. So those are very clear and measurable. The next important thing when you plan for professional development is to be clear about the real world application. So when you plan using Scaffold, you must be very clear about the relevance of the work beyond the classroom. The learners, whether they be children, young people, or your colleagues, must see the relevance of the work. They must be able to apply what you talk about to the real world. So that is a very important setting to understand. My advice would be, if I was planning professional development, is to get to know the area, get to know the delegates, get to know what are the priorities in the town, in the country, in the school, in the community. Make the learning relevant to the real world. In some cases, there are global themes that are relevant to all of us. For example, if I said to you artificial intelligence, all of us are aware of the rise of artificial intelligence. So it doesn't matter where we are in the world, that is a real world relevance. The other cards that you look at on the screen, you will see that you need to think about when you set your planning, you need to think about how much time you have for your workshops, for your professional development activities. Do you have an hour? Do you have a half a day? And then make sure that your content meets that requirement. You need to think about the topic, of course. What's the actual content that you intend to cover? What exactly are the learners going to learn about? What part of the curriculum are you going to be covering? Is it, for example, an interdisciplinary project where you're not just covering English or maths or science? You might be covering several areas of the curriculum. You need to think about resources and space, how much time and space you have to carry this out. What resources do you have? Maybe you don't have access to digital technologies. So what else could you use to help learners understand? And then, of course, you must think of the needs of the audience. You really need to think about who you are training, who are the beneficiaries, who's going to get most out of this, who are the target audience. So those 8 setting cards are very important when you plan professional development activity. They will help you with another group of cards called planning cards, which we're not going to talk about today, but in another webinar we will. So those are the 8 cards you need to think about for the context. Could we go please to the next slide? So here is an example perhaps of how you might apply some of these cards. If you think about an activity such as conducting a small-scale inquiry, so let's suppose you decide I'm going to be working on one area of Scaffold. It might be real-world projects. So if you choose that, you might think, well, how can I find out whether my work is making a difference? So you would support colleagues perhaps in thinking about how they're going to measure the impact of what they do. Will they, for example, will they ask at the start of the project a set of questions, and at the end of the project, post-test, ask another set of questions? So they have a pre and a post-test, and they can see what difference the intervention is having. So whether it be an aspect of scaffold, cards, or something else. So evaluating, we'll have a whole workshop on this later on in the series. We'll talk to you about evaluation and inquiry. Could we go to the next slide, please? This example is trying to show how you might host an event. Let's suppose you decide as educators that you're going to host a small conference, or maybe a team meeting, or maybe a staff meeting. Whatever the scale, if you're going to have an event to showcase your work, you need to think about those factors: resources, duration, location, space. All those factors come into play if you're planning an event. You might want to think about how the teachers are going to share their understanding. What are they going to share? Are they going to just share achievements? Are you going to, in your professional development, ask them to come up with a query, a question, which you could answer? You could structure an event very simply by saying, well, mention 2 things that are working well and 1 thing that could be improved. Or you could say, give us a presentation around how you might need more support. So it's structuring the event is very, very important. It's important to empower teachers, to give them the voice. And sometimes you can ask teachers and educators to make their own suggestions on how they present. You could give them choices. So sometimes with professional development events, if you go to conferences, many of you go to conferences, you will see people can choose how they present. It could be a poster. It could be a seminar. It could be a workshop. It could be a walk-in gallery. So people walk around and look at people's work. We do something in our country. It's called research speed dating. It sounds strange, but we bring all our students together and they go around each table and they have 3 minutes. There's a big timer. And after 3 minutes, they go to the next table. And then they go to the next table. And as they go around, they add knowledge to what's already there. So you can do lots of creative ways to showcase events, to showcase learning. You might do a film. You might do students or educators making a small vlog or a blog or a cartoon strip. There's lots of things people can do to showcase their understanding. Maybe an infographic. All of these things are important so that it could be a story. Storytelling is very powerful. I was at an event recently, and in the professional development, the teachers were given 3 minutes to tell a story about their experience. And it was very moving and very powerful. Storytelling is a very good way of professional development because we tend to remember stories. We tend to remember them, particularly if they're personal. So think about stories as a way, you know, actually writing short stories is also a very good way, a visual story. Thank you for that. Let's move on towards the last part of the webinar. And here's a little task for you. I don't know whether you would mind doing this, but I want you in the chat to write, please, 3 words that if you in the future wanted to be described by your students, if they were to describe you years from now, maybe you've taught them and they've moved on, or colleagues, what 3 words would you want them to say about you as an educator? So think for a moment and then choose 3 words you'd like to be remembered by. Not on your tombstone, that would be inappropriate, but 3 words you'd like to be remembered by. I'll give you a moment to do that, please. So 3 words that you would like to be remembered by your students. And then possibly, if Victoria, somebody could perhaps quickly translate a couple of them, then we could talk about what's there.
Yes, absolutely. So here comes inspiring, caring, enthusiastic, wise, professional, kind, creative, inspiring, supporting, creative, productive, changing, demanding, responsible and creative, competent, kind, creative, attentive, creative, positive, advanced, creative, smart, kind, happy, modern, productive, professional, understanding,
Thank you, Victoria.
practice-oriented.
Thank you for that. And please carry on adding the words. If you could put your words there, we will create a visual for you and send it to you all, so you have a record of what you hope to be remembered by in the future. The reason I ask you that question, by the way, is if you look at the words coming into the chat, what do you notice collectively about the way in which we want to be described? Have a very careful look at what colleagues are putting down, and can you see are there themes that are emerging? And then I'll tell you why we're doing this. So I'll give you a moment to just look at the themes and what you notice. Doesn't matter where we're working, are there common themes coming through? So, for example,
Хорошие воспоминания были. О них всегда были хорошие воспоминания. Полезные были. Никто не хочет себе видеть стороны плохим.
The colleague is saying basically everyone wants to be remembered as a professional. No one wants anyone to have a bad memory about him or herself. But basically what also colleagues are writing in the chat is that creativity is basically the thing that keeps repeating.
Yes. Yes. So thank you for that. I want to mention a couple of things. First of all, if you were to map your words against scaffold, you will see you've basically written the manifesto for scaffold, because creativity runs through scaffold. Some of those other qualities you mentioned, being professional, working together, is part of scaffold. Now, why I say that to you is because scaffold is really built on what is good teaching and learning, what is a good professional person. That's really what it's about. And when you talk about kindness, we talk about the emotional, social and emotional aspect of scaffold. It's really important. And I often think, isn't it a shame in the world we don't have a degree or a PhD in kindness? Wouldn't it be wonderful in the world if people left school with a PhD in being kind, compassionate, caring? We don't have that, sadly, but what we do have is the dispositions that should underpin everything. So if you care for the environment, you should be a caring person. You should be kind. So when you think of scaffold, don't think of it as a long way away from the way you want to be remembered. Think of it as a means to help you be remembered the way you want to be remembered. And you would do me a wonderful favour if the next time you talk to your learners, whether they are colleagues or children, ask them to mention in 3 words what their ideal educator would look like. And then if we pooled all that, wouldn't it be very interesting to see what learners think about ideal learning and teaching and education? And I would, well, I won't say what I think will happen. You could try that out, send it in to us, and we could create something for you. We'll do a really nice creative piece and send it back to you. And maybe we could create a little visual to hang up. And you could say, look, this is people from all over part of Central Asia. This is a common glue, cement, that kind of we want to be. Why is this relevant? Because I know time is beating us. If we go to the next slide, please. This is from the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development. This is a very big organization which looks at education globally. And what they ask, in a way, are the questions that I've asked in a different way. They are starting to explore what is it that students need job-wise, right? That what do we need to do to prepare students for jobs that are not yet around in the next 20 years? And you've said creativity. We've got to get our students to be creative thinkers. And in a way, this is the link between the OECD and what you're thinking. And Scaffold is a way to meet those questions. Scaffold is a way to help us develop collaboration, compassion, develop reflective thinking, and so forth. And the other question the OECD asks is, how can we, in the bottom right-hand corner, how can we help them to become more respectful, take responsibility? And again, that's what we are saying we want to be remembered by. So in the work in the next 5 webinars, please see Scaffold as something you can integrate in your everyday teaching. It doesn't have to be an add-on. It's something we can integrate. And then the final slide, and then we'll finish then because there's a few things we need to do to finish. That is a summary of Scaffold on 1 slide. If you're not familiar with Scaffold, that's tried to bring it all together for you. So today, in the bottom corner, we spoke about setting. We spoke about when you plan professional development, you need to think about your objective. You need to think about your topic, your audience. That's the building block. And then as you go through, somebody said in the chat, we want to develop competent students. So that's important. So those are the ways that Scaffold come together. So to summarize, I just want to summarize some takeaways. And I wonder whether you could put a takeaway for yourself in the chat. If you've learned one thing from the webinar, please write it in the chat. That'd be very helpful feedback for us. As you're doing that, I will just summarize for you in a minute. So the purpose of this webinar was really, firstly, to help you understand that professional development is really important so that we keep up to date. It's a way of empowering us. The next thing we looked at in the seminar is we looked at different examples of CPD in different parts of the world. We looked very briefly at Japan and Canada and Singapore, and we looked at an example in Kazakhstan. What else we've done in this seminar is we've looked at different forms of CPD. Yes, so within those countries and elsewhere, some face-to-face, some in-person, some online. So we can do CPD in different ways. And then we started right at the end of the seminar to talk about examples of how you could use scaffold in different contexts. And then finally, right at the end, we've asked you to think about how you personally want to be remembered as an educator. Who knows, maybe in this room, one of you will win a Nobel Prize for education. That'd be wonderful, wouldn't it, in 20 years' time to see one of you on the stage, or maybe the World Educator stage. There are conferences to do with outstanding teaching. So thank you ever so much. Is there anything, Victoria, we need to wrap up at the end?
Yes, just a small closing. Уважаемые коллеги, спасибо вам большое за выделенное время. На сегодня мы хотим завершить наш первый вебинар по профессиональному развитию педагогов. Хотели бы отметить то, что запись сегодняшнего вебинара, также материалы, которые сегодня доктор Григ показывал во время вебинара, будут опубликованы на нашем мини-сайте. И все ссылки будут также предоставлены в нашем телеграм-канале. Либо вы можете сразу пройти на наш мини-сайт. Все ссылки сейчас размещены в нашем чате. Вы можете ознакомиться со всей информацией по сегодняшнему вебинару, а также всех будущих вебинаров данной серии. Напоминаю, что данных вебинаров будет 6 в общей сложности, и продолжаться они будут до апреля следующего года. Спасибо большое за сегодняшний прекрасный вебинар. Спасибо за то, что были с нами, и желаю вам продуктивного всем дня.
Спасибо большое за семинар.